They said it with the kind of certainty only a civilization obsessed with perfection could manage. The chamber was silent when the final verdict was delivered, the air heavy with the weight of a future quietly collapsing. Their queen would never bear a child. The words echoed through the vast crystalline hall, bouncing off towering pillars etched with the history of a species that had conquered disease, rewritten genetics, and outlived their own stars. A species that had engineered itself into near divinity, flawless minds, flawless bodies, flawless control over life itself. Except for this. She stood unmoving at the center, regal and composed, her expression unreadable to all but the closest observers. To everyone else, she was the embodiment of perfection, tall, radiant, her presence commanding enough to silence entire fleets. But beneath that calm exterior, something fractured in a way no technology could repair. A single, irreversible flaw. Around her, the council reacted in their own restrained ways. Some lowered their gaze. Others began whispering calculations, projections, contingencies. One of them even had the audacity to suggest alternatives: cloning, synthetic heirs, distant relatives bred for compatibility. Solutions, all of them. Cold. Logical. Empty. None of them were what the Empire needed. Because it wasn't just about survival. It was about continuity. Legacy. A living future, not a manufactured one. And now, that future had been denied. Days passed, though time felt irrelevant in a palace that floated above an artificial horizon. The Queen continued her duties as if nothing had changed. She signed decrees, commanded fleets, resolved disputes across systems. Entire worlds depended on her decisions, and she carried that responsibility without hesitation. But the private moments told a different story. In the quiet spaces between obligations, she found herself staring at genetic projections that never changed. Endless simulations, each one ending in the same sterile conclusion. Incompatibility. Failure. Impossibility. Her people had explored thousands of species across the galaxy. Every viable genetic pairing had been tested, analyzed, exhausted. There was no match. No solution. For the first time in her long life, there was something she could not overcome. Which made what happened next feel almost insulting. The explosion wasn't large, but it was loud enough to disrupt 3 layers of palace security and trigger an immediate lockdown. Energy flickered across the lower engineering sectors, alarms pulsing in rhythmic urgency. Guards mobilized instantly, scanning for threats, intrusions, sabotage. Instead, they found a human. He was lying on his back beneath a half-open panel, one arm buried deep inside a mess of alien circuitry that clearly did not belong to his species. His other hand held a tool that looked like it had been repurposed from at least 5 different devices. Sparks crackled dangerously close to his face, but he didn't seem particularly concerned. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "Either this fixes it, or I make it worse in a really impressive way." One of the guards stepped forward, weapon raised. "Identify yourself." The human turned his head slightly, squinting up at the armored figure. The guy you called to fix your overheating problem? This sector is restricted." "Yeah, I figured that out when everything started screaming at me." Another burst of sparks shot out, followed by a low hum that slowly stabilized into something resembling functionality. The lights stopped flickering. The alarms died down. The entire system seemed to calm. The human pulled his arm out and sat up, looking around with a satisfied nod. "There we go. See? Mostly fixed." "Mostly?" the guard repeated. "Well," he said, standing up and wiping his hands on his clothes, "if it explodes again, just don't stand so close next time." It was at that exact moment that the Queen entered the chamber. She had come personally, more out of instinct than necessity. Disruptions within the palace were rare, and when they happened, they were usually handled long before reaching her attention. But something about this one had drawn her in. Her gaze landed on the human instantly. He looked unimpressive. Smaller than most species she dealt with, lacking any visible enhancements or signs of genetic refinement. His clothing was practical, worn, and entirely unsuited for a royal environment. There was grease on his hands, a smudge across his face. And yet he stood there without fear. In fact, he didn't even seem to realize who she was. "You're the boss, right?" he said casually, glancing at her. "Good news, your system isn't trying to kill itself anymore." The guard stiffened, clearly waiting for her reaction. No one spoke to her like that. No one addressed her without formality, without reverence. She studied him for a moment, intrigued despite herself. "You repaired a system designed by minds far beyond your own," she said evenly. He shrugged. "Yeah, well, it was overcomplicated. You guys like to make things fancy. Sometimes simple works better." One of the scientists in the background made a horrified noise at that statement. The Queen ignored it. "You are aware that failure would have resulted in severe consequences?" "Sure," he replied. "But it didn't. So, I'm guessing I still get paid?" There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, she felt something shift. Not in the room. Not in the system he had repaired. In herself. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, something broke through the endless weight of perfection and failure. Amusement. It was small. Subtle. Barely there. But it was real. "You will be compensated," she said. "Though I suspect your definition of value differs from ours." "Honestly?" he said, grinning slightly. "Food would be great. Your planet has been real weird about snacks." The silence that followed was almost sacred. A being who had just defied the understanding of her most advanced engineers was negotiating for snacks. She should have dismissed him. Sent him away. Filed him under irrelevant anomalies and returned to matters of empire and survival. Instead, she found herself asking, "What is your name, human?" He hesitated for half a second, like the question surprised him more than the situation. Then he answered. And for reasons she could not yet understand, she remembered it. As he was escorted out, still talking, still completely unaware of the significance of anything that had just happened, the Queen remained where she was, her thoughts uncharacteristically unsettled. A human. Genetically insignificant. Scientifically irrelevant. Entirely unremarkable. And yet, he had solved a problem her people hadn't. Not through superiority, but through simplicity. Her gaze drifted toward the repaired system, then toward the doorway where he had disappeared. For the first time since the Council's verdict, a thought emerged that did not end in failure. It was faint. Illogical. But it refused to disappear. Maybe they had overlooked something. And somewhere in the vast machinery of her empire, a very unimportant human was just happy he hadn't been vaporized, and was already thinking about what kind of snacks royalty might have. The first time he came back, it wasn't even intentional. At least, that's what he claimed. One of the palace systems had begun malfunctioning again, nothing catastrophic, just a series of minor failures cascading in a way that annoyed the engineers more than it threatened anything. Naturally, they tried to fix it themselves. Naturally, they made it worse. So someone, reluctantly and with visible discomfort, suggested calling the human. He arrived carrying the same mismatched tools, looking far too relaxed for someone stepping into one of the most secure places in the galaxy. This time, the guards watched him more closely, as if expecting him to explode something on purpose. "Hey," he said as he walked in, glancing around. "Miss me?" No one answered. He didn't seem to mind. The Queen was present again, though she told herself it was purely coincidental. There were always matters requiring her attention. The palace was vast. Her presence here meant nothing. Still, she watched. He approached the malfunctioning console, leaned over it, and frowned. "Okay, who touched this?" One of the engineers stiffened. "We attempted to correct the error." "Yeah, I can see that," he muttered. "You corrected it straight into a worse problem." The room went very quiet. He didn't even realize what he'd said. Instead, he started working, movements quick and instinctive. No hesitation. No reverence for the complexity of the system. He pulled panels open, adjusted components, and occasionally tapped something like he expected it to behave out of sheer annoyance. What exactly are you doing? The Queen asked. He glanced up briefly. Fixing it. That is not an explanation. He shrugged. It doesn't need to be complicated. Something's overheating, so I rerouted the load. Something's glitching, I reset it. You guys built this like you expected everything to be perfect all the time. And you did not? She asked. He snorted softly. Nothing's perfect where I come from. Stuff breaks. You fix it. Then it breaks again, usually in a new way. Keeps life interesting. There it was again. That strange perspective. Her people spent centuries trying to eliminate flaws entirely. Humans adapted to them. Within minutes, the system stabilized. Again. He stepped back, stretching slightly. All right. Try not to improve it this time. One of the scientists looked personally offended. The Queen studied him, her curiosity deepening. You approach problems without regard for design integrity. I approach problems with the goal of making them stop being problems, he replied. Different mindset. She found herself almost agreeing. He was compensated, this time with both credits and what he had specifically requested, food. A tray was brought in, filled with carefully selected items deemed safe for human consumption. He stared at it like it was the real reward. Okay, he said, pointing. This looks suspicious. What is it? A nutrient-dense protein construct, someone answered. He slowly pushed it aside. Yeah, no. Hard pass. What about that? The Queen asked, gesturing to another item. He picked it up, sniffed it, then took a cautious bite. His expression shifted almost immediately. Okay, that's actually good. There was something unexpectedly satisfying about watching him react with genuine enjoyment over something so simple. You may take more, she said. Careful, he replied, grinning slightly. I might start breaking things on purpose if this is the payment. That would be unwise. Yeah, but effective. Again, the room didn't know how to process him. The visits continued after that. Sometimes for legitimate issues. Sometimes for things that could have been handled without him, but weren't. Each time, he brought the same energy. Casual. Unbothered. Entirely immune to the weight of the place he stood in. And slowly, something shifted. The Queen began to notice how the atmosphere changed when he was around. Conversations became less rigid. Silence felt less oppressive. Even the guards seemed confused in a different way, as if unsure whether to treat him as a threat or an inconvenience. For her, the change was more personal. He spoke to her without calculation. Without fear. Without expectation. It was new. One day, he found her alone. Not entirely alone, there were always guards at a distance, but far enough that the space felt private. She stood near a panoramic window, looking out over the endless expanse of her empire. Stars stretched into infinity, each one under her protection, her responsibility. He walked up beside her, holding something he was eating. Nice view, he said. It is not for decoration, she replied. It is a reminder. Of what? Of what I must maintain. He nodded slowly, taking another bite. Yeah. That's a lot. There was no sarcasm in his voice. No dismissal. Just acknowledgement. You carry it alone, he added after a moment. I am not alone, she said. You know what I mean. She did. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. After a while, he spoke again. You ever get tired of it? Her first instinct was to say no. Queens did not tire. They did not falter. They did not question. But something about him made honesty feel easier. Yes, she said quietly. He nodded again, like that answer made perfect sense. Figured. She glanced at him. You accept that answer without judgment. Why wouldn't I? He said. Where I'm from, everyone gets tired. Doesn't mean they stop. Just means they're human. You use that word as if it explains everything. Sometimes it does. She considered that. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke again. I was told I could never bear a child. He didn't react the way others did. No immediate sympathy. No awkward silence. No attempt to fix it. He just listened. That sucks, he said simply. It was such an absurd response that, for a moment, she didn't know how to process it. And then, something shifted. A small, quiet release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. You do not offer solutions, she said. Not everything has one, he replied. And even if it does, you've probably already tried it. She had. All of it, she admitted. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the stars. Then maybe it's not about fixing it. Then what is it about? He thought for a moment. Living anyway, I guess. She turned that over in her mind. Her entire existence had been built around control, perfection, solutions. And here was a species that simply kept going. Even when things didn't work. Even when they couldn't be fixed. Humans are strange, she said. Yeah, he agreed. We get that a lot. Another quiet moment passed. Closer now somehow. Not physically. Not overtly. But something in the space between them had changed. He glanced at her, then away, like he wasn't entirely sure what to do with the moment. Hey, he said, a little more softly. You're still, you know, important. With or without that. No one had ever said it like that. Not as a reassurance tied to duty or legacy. Just as a fact. She felt it settle somewhere deep, somewhere untouched by politics or expectation. For the first time, the absence of an heir didn't feel like the only thing defining her. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, that mattered more than any scientific breakthrough. The stars stretched endlessly before them. And for once, she didn't feel quite so alone standing beneath them. It began with something so small no one thought to question it. She was late. Not late in the way that mattered to governance or duty. Her schedule remained flawless, her decisions precise, her presence unwavering. But internally, something had shifted. Subtle at first. A delay in biological rhythms that her species had long since perfected and monitored down to the smallest variable. At first, the palace systems flagged it as a minor irregularity. A fluctuation. Nothing more. Then it persisted. The Queen noticed before anyone else said anything. Of course she did. Her body had always been something she understood completely, every function mapped, every limitation defined with cold, scientific certainty. Except now, it wasn't behaving the way it was supposed to. She didn't panic. Panic was inefficient. Instead, she requested a full diagnostic. Privately. The medical chamber was silent as the scan began. Advanced instruments surrounded her, their soft hum filling the space with a kind of clinical reassurance. This was familiar territory. Controlled. Predictable. It should have ended the same way it always did. It didn't. The lead scientist stared at the data longer than necessary. Then longer still. His expression, usually composed to the point of being unreadable, began to crack in a way that sent a ripple of unease through the room. Report, she said. He didn't answer immediately. That was the first sign something was wrong. Or not wrong. Impossible. There must be an error. Another scientist said quickly, stepping forward, recalibrating the system. Run the scan again. They did. And again. And again. Each time, the result remained unchanged. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, the lead scientist turned toward her, his voice no longer steady. Your Majesty, you are carrying developing life. The words didn't make sense. Not at first. They existed, but they didn't connect to reality in any meaningful way. That is not possible, she said. We believed so as well. Believed. Past tense. Her gaze shifted to the display. Complex biological data scrolled across the surface, translating something that should not exist into undeniable evidence. Growth markers. Cellular division. Genetic mapping. All of it real. All of it hers. No compatible genome exists, she said, more to herself than to them. That is what we cannot reconcile. Another scientist added, his voice somewhere between awe and fear. The genetic structure is stabilizing. Not rejecting. Not degrading. It is integrating in a way we have never observed. Explain. We cannot. That was the problem. Her entire world had been built on understanding. On answers. On the ability to analyze, predict, and control every outcome. And now, faced with something that defied all of it, there was nothing. Only one variable had changed. Her thoughts moved toward it immediately. Toward him. No, she said quietly, as if rejecting the idea could undo the reality. But it didn't. Because there was no other explanation. A human. Genetically insignificant. Scientifically dismissed. Entirely incompatible by every model her people had ever created. And yet. Isolate the data, she ordered. No external transmission. No discussion beyond this chamber. Yes, Your Majesty. They obeyed instantly, but it didn't matter. Secrets like this didn't stay hidden. Not for long. He found out the worst possible way. Which, in his case, meant being dragged out of a maintenance corridor by 3 highly stressed scientists who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Okay, first of all, he said as they pulled him along. This is new. Usually you guys at least ask before kidnapping me. This is not a request. One of them snapped. Yeah, I got that. They brought him into a lab far more advanced than anything he'd seen so far, which was saying something. Displays lit up around him, filled with data he couldn't even begin to understand. The Queen was already there. That alone told him this wasn't normal. He looked between her and the scientists, immediately sensing the shift in atmosphere. This wasn't the usual quiet intensity. This was something else. What happened? He asked. No one answered right away. Then one of the scientists gestured toward a display. You are the only new variable introduced into her biological environment. He blinked. Okay, that sounds like I'm about to be blamed for something. You are responsible. For what? The silence that followed was heavy. Then the Queen spoke. I am with child. He stared at her. Then at the scientists. Then back at her. I'm sorry, what? It is confirmed, one of them said. Multiple scans. No deviation. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Wait, no? No, that's not, that's not possible, right? You guys said that. A lot. Very confidently. We did. And now? Now we are revising our understanding of reality. He let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. That's not reassuring. His gaze shifted back to her, searching her expression for something. Anger, confusion, anything that made sense. What he found instead was something quieter. Uncertainty. And beneath it, something almost fragile. You believe this is because of me, he said. There is no alternative explanation, she replied. He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're telling me I accidentally solved a problem your entire species couldn't fix? Yes. That feels like something I should have noticed happening. No one found that funny. Which somehow made it worse. The room erupted into discussion almost immediately after that. Scientists arguing over data, proposing theories, rejecting them just as quickly. Words like genetic anomaly, cross-species stabilization, and unknown compatibility factor filled the air. None of it helped. Because none of it answered the only question that mattered. How? The answer didn't exist. Not yet. The news didn't stay contained. It couldn't. Within days, it spread beyond the palace. Then beyond the planet. Then beyond the system. And when it did, everything changed. Entire civilizations that had once viewed humans as irrelevant suddenly took notice. A species previously dismissed as biologically unremarkable was now being discussed as something entirely different. A solution. A possibility. A miracle. He hated it. I didn't do anything, he muttered one day, pacing back and forth while a group of officials argued nearby about controlled studies and diplomatic opportunities. You exist, one of them replied. That appears to be sufficient. That's not how that works. But it was, apparently. Requests started coming in. Not for alliances or trade. For access. To him. To humanity. To whatever impossible factor had changed everything. The Queen shut most of them down immediately. Firmly. But the pressure kept building. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what this meant for the galaxy. And in the middle of it all, he stood there, completely unprepared for any of it. I fix machines, he said at one point, looking at her like he was trying to anchor himself in something real. That's my thing. I'm not this. She studied him carefully. You are not what they believe you to be, she said. Good, he replied quickly. Because they're getting real weird about it. A faint hint of something almost like amusement touched her expression. Then faded. But you are still the cause, she added. Yeah, he sighed. Still trying to process that part. Silence settled between them for a moment. Then, more quietly, she said, So am I. For all the chaos, the noise, the endless pressure from every direction, that was the only part that felt real. Not the miracle. Not the science. Just two people standing in the middle of something neither of them understood. And somehow, despite everything, that was enough to keep it from falling apart. At first, he thought he could just endure it. That was the plan. Stay quiet, don't break anything important, avoid eye contact with anyone who looked like they might want to study him, and maybe, eventually, everything would calm down. It didn't. If anything, it got worse. Every corridor he walked through felt narrower than before, not because of the architecture, but because of the attention. Guards followed him at a distance that was meant to feel respectful but came across as suffocating. Scientists watched him like he might spontaneously reveal the secrets of the universe if they stared hard enough. Even the servants whispered when he passed, like he'd become some kind of walking legend overnight. He hated it. I can't even get food without 3 people analyzing how I chew, he muttered one day, pacing back and forth in a chamber that was definitely too large to be called a room. Do you know how uncomfortable that is? The Queen watched him quietly, her posture composed, though her gaze lingered on him longer than usual. They are attempting to understand what has occurred. By watching me eat. It is one of many methods. He stopped pacing, turning toward her. Yeah, well, it's a terrible method. For a brief moment, something softened in her expression, something dangerously close to amusement, but it faded quickly beneath the weight she carried. Everything about her had changed, even if she tried to hide it. Not physically, not in any obvious way, but in the subtle shifts. The way her hands sometimes rested unconsciously against her abdomen. The way her focus drifted for half a second longer than it used to. The way the palace, the empire, the entire galaxy seemed to orbit around something that had once been declared impossible. And somehow, he was at the center of it. I didn't sign up for this, he said, quieter now. Any of it. I am aware. That's not just me complaining, he added. I mean it. I'm not built for this kind of thing. You have adapted thus far. Fixing machines and accidentally changing the future of an empire are not the same level of adaptation. She couldn't argue with that. The silence stretched between them, heavier this time. He looked away first. I think I should leave, he said. The words landed harder than anything else he'd said before. She didn't respond immediately. Not because she didn't understand, but because she did. You believe distance will resolve this, she said eventually. I believe distance will make it less intense, he replied. For everyone. You've got your people, your empire, he gestured vaguely. Everything. You don't need me here making it more complicated. Her gaze didn't waver. That is not your decision to make alone. He let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. See that right there? That's exactly what I mean. This This whole thing where suddenly my life isn't just mine anymore. You are connected to this outcome. Yeah, I know, he said, a little sharper than he intended. Trust me, I know. Everyone keeps reminding me. The tension in the room shifted, tightening, but neither of them stepped away from it. For once, there were no scientists, no guards interrupting, no distractions to soften the moment. Just truth. You think I wanted this? She asked, her voice quieter now, but far more intense. He blinked, caught off guard. That's not what I was told my entire life that this was impossible. She continued. That I would never have this. That no matter what I did, no matter how much power I held, there was a limit I could not overcome. Her composure cracked, not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough that he felt it. And now that it has changed, you would choose to walk away from it? That's not fair, he said, but there was no real force behind it. Is it not? He hesitated. Because she wasn't wrong. I'm not trying to abandon anything, he said finally. I'm trying to not make things worse. And you believe your absence would improve them? I think it would make things simpler. She stepped closer. Simplicity is not always an improvement. He met her gaze, and for once, there was no humor, no deflection. Just honesty. I don't belong here, he said. The words hung between them. For a moment, it seemed like she might accept them. Instead, she said, You did not belong in this galaxy's understanding of possibility either. That stopped him. You were not part of any equation that led to this outcome. She continued. You were not predicted, not considered, not accounted for. A small step closer. And yet you are here. Another. And because of that, everything has changed. He didn't move. Didn't look away. You speak of belonging as if it is something predetermined, she said. As if it is assigned before you arrive. She was close now. Closer than she had ever been before. But you have already altered what is possible, she said softly. Not through design. Not through intention. Her voice dropped, just enough to make the words feel personal. But by being exactly what you are. For once, he didn't have a response ready. Didn't have a joke. Didn't have a way to deflect. Because for the first time since all of this had started, the weight of it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like something else. Something real. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. You do not need to know, she replied. You only need to decide. He let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. Decide what? Whether you will face this with me, she said, or run from it alone. That was it. Not a command. Not an expectation. A choice. For someone like him, that mattered more than anything else. He looked around the room, the massive space, the impossible technology, the life he had never imagined being part of. Then back at her. At the one thing in all of this that actually made sense. I'm still not doing the whole royal thing, he said finally. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, that faint, rare expression returned. Not quite a smile. But close. That was never a requirement, she said. Good, he replied. Because I'd be terrible at it. You already are. Hey. Something lighter settled between them then. Not gone, not resolved, but manageable. Real. And I'm still fixing things my way, he added. If your palace breaks, I'm not waiting for permission. I would expect nothing less. And I'm definitely still getting paid in food. That can be arranged. He nodded, like that was the most important condition of all. Then, after a moment, a little more quietly. And I'm not letting anyone treat me like some kind of miracle. She studied him for a second before answering. That may be the only condition you cannot enforce. Yeah, he sighed. Figured. But somehow, it didn't feel as overwhelming as before. Not when he wasn't facing it alone. Beyond the chamber, the Empire continued to shift, to adapt, to react to a future no one had predicted. Humans would be studied. Debated. revered in ways they never had been before. All because of something no one could explain. But inside that space, none of that mattered. Not the politics. Not the science. Not the expectations of an entire galaxy. Just two people, standing at the center of something impossible. Not because they understood it, but because somehow they didn't need to. And as she stood beside him, her voice softer than it had ever been, she spoke the truth that had once felt like an ending. I was told I could never bear a child. A pause. Not filled with doubt anymore. But something stronger. But somehow human. For the first time, there was no weight behind the words. Only certainty. You changed that.